Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, we're joined once again by VP of Design and Manufacturing here at Autodesk, Greg Fallon.
Fresh off main stage. Welcome.
Thank you.
How was it?
That was awesome.
Yeah, it's always exciting because you literally take like the most exciting things that we do here and you just kind of put it into like a 60-minute session, and I always love the main stages.
It's super fun. It's really, really cool to see all the people engaged and then get all the stories afterwards. It's awesome.
Are you more nervous talking to us and our giant listenership or on main stage?
Oh my God, I'm terrified.
I can tell.
So before we jump into the real questions, we have a couple of questions. It's this game that we call How Well Do You Know Your CEO?
Oh.
So this is a competition. This is you and other SVPs and VPs and basically other internal folks, and we're reporting the answers back to Andrew. So, and what we're doing is...
now I'm really nervous.
Now you really are nervous. Okay, so, and it's either going to be a quote from Andrew or a quote from another notable famous person. So hopefully you follow Andrew on his Twitter feed, because there's gold. The stuff, it's gold, Jerry. So it's either, again, so the first group is going to be, it's either going to be Andrew or Neil deGrasse Tyson.
All right.
So Apollo in 1969, Shuttle in 1981, nothing in 2011. Our space program would look awesome to anyone living backwards through time. Neil deGrasse Tyson or Andrew?
That's Neil.
Very good. Next. I think space is not the final frontier, but the next frontier.
That's Andrew.
No, that is Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I do really like how confidently he said it, but I had to look back and be like, maybe it was.
You didn't hesitate. Okay, I deleted my Facebook account 3 years ago. Wasn't hard at all.
Andrew.
Very good. Everybody's getting that one. That must be one of his most famous tweets, because everybody's getting that one right.
That's the one
Or
that
he
got
really
circulated.
hates them. I don't know. All right, round two. Questions have gotten harder, values stay the same.
Yes.
Andrew Anagnost or Mr. Rogers?
You ready?
Oh, I thought you were trying to get me to choose.
No,
No.
These are our quotes. Which one is your favorite?
You don't answer that
Okay.
question.
That. Yeah.
The future belongs to the young. It's uplifting to see them own it.
Mr. Rogers.
Andrew. We live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say it's not my community, not my world, not my problem.
Andrew.
Mr. Rogers.
0 for 2.
Well, I think it's very important, no matter what you may do professionally, to keep alive some of the healthy interests of your youth.
Mr. Rogers.
Oh, very
there
good.
you go. Okay, you're coming on strong now.
See, I feel like that's a tough one to get, so that's good.
Okay, this is Andrew or Bob Ross, the painter with the big hair. You ready? This is really difficult. It gets more difficult. It's crazy. There's nothing in the world that breeds success like success.
Bob.
Very good. If only we could all respect how others choose to live their lives. See,
That's the right reaction.
that's everybody's reaction.
Andrew.
Very good. That is Andrew. And the last one between Bob and Andrew is talent is a pursued interest. Anything you're willing to practice, you can do.
Bob.
Very good. You're coming on strong here in the end. We got one more section.
Are you a big Bob Ross fan or something? Because I think you're the only one who nailed that round.
really?
Yeah.
You nailed the Bob Ross round.
Okay.
My secret hobby.
Yeah.
I want to see Andrew with that hair.
Oh, how sweet would that
That should be part of our video, is like him with the hair. All right, round 4, the final round. Andrew or Elon Musk?
This one is super tough.
Can someone tell me when we're going to stop calling Twitter and Facebook tech companies?
Elon Musk.
Ooh, Andrew. That's why you need solar panels on your roof. Electricity has to come from somewhere.
Elon Musk.
Ooh, Andrew. One more. Really tough. Growing a business is as much about the innovation, drive, and determination of the people behind it as the product they sell.
You know, I'm going to say Elon, only because I was 0 for 2.
Yeah.
All right, and you got it right. Well done.
The interesting thing was everybody we've asked so far, like, it's like they want these to be Andrew's quotes. It's some of them are so Andrew, right? So
that was beautiful.
Okay.
Thanks for doing that for us.
so now to the real questions. James?
All right. So for a change, design and manufacturing, we actually know something about that. We've had head of education on and sustainability and what CMOs do. We don't know what any of that is. But for those of us out there who don't know what you're doing, could you give us a quick look into like a day in your life?
Oh man.
At least a day in the life at Autodesk.
Yeah, so and it's fun. I just moved into this job 3 months ago.
Okay.
So I spent a lot of time understanding what customers are doing, just as I did before. So that doesn't change. Do a lot of customer interactions. I spent a lot of time thinking about how we want to grow the business from a bigger perspective. You know, in the product world, I was very focused on customer workflows, which are super important. I think about that now, but I also take a step back and try to think about, in the greater context of design and manufacturing in Autodesk, what does it take to grow our business? And then there's a lot of details. How do we tell our story? What does that look like? I spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make our intentions known to the outside world in a really simple way.
I assume that Autodesk University is one of your big places to go and get to talk to customers and get to know what they need and what they feel about what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent the last 48 hours almost entirely talking to customers.
That's great.
So you had a really big part in generative design and kind of where it is. What were some of the challenges in getting that kind of technology? I mean, something that in some cases has never been done before or delivered the way we delivered it. What were some of the challenges and some of the exciting things about bringing that to market?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, so first of all, a lot of people don't know this, but I joined the company wanting to commercialize Project Dreamcatcher. So I spent my entire career in the simulation world, most recently at ANSYS. I grew up in the CFD world at Fluent. I did my graduate work. I was an engineer working on fluid flow and reacting flows. So I'm a geek by heart with simulation. And I also spent a lot of time watching customers in the past try to figure out how to use simulation. And I always felt like artificial intelligence and simulation had a much bigger role to play in the design process. I spent 20 years frustrated that most people use these types of algorithms as a virtual laboratory when you can actually gain much more insight. So I've been thinking about this for over 20 years. Coming here and seeing Project Dreamcatcher on the stage, I was hired in. I met Jeff Kowalski, which was, I was a bit of a junkie about Jeff. I got to know his team, and we looked at kind of what they were doing, and I immediately said, we want to commercialize your stuff. Right. So first step was actually doing it and working with Jeff, getting Amar, and at the time Carl spun up on this idea. But then we started to think about okay, if we're going to do this, the real hard thing is what's the value proposition to the end customer, right? Because I knew that there was something there, but it was really hard to say whether that was is it going to be lightweighting? Are we going to do something to make things lightweighted? And I had a hard time with that one because everybody else does that. You could go use other tools to lightweight things. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the value proposition, and honestly, when we went to market with generative design, we weren't really sure what the end value proposition was. So we kind of said, look, we got some general ideas. We're just going to watch how people use it. And that's where it gets super interesting. So the real hard part was staying super disciplined and staying customer focused, right? Because I had my own vision of what it should be, what it shouldn't be. Everybody that I worked with had their own ideas. It's one of these things where everybody has an opinion. So the hard part was staying super disciplined, working in a fashion that we could get it in the hands of customers as quickly as possible in a usable form, and then stay disciplined and watch them and interpret it. And my biggest fear was that when we released this product, the only people in the world that were going to use it were the thought leaders in the world, the JPLs, the Airbuses, the OEMs. And I think it's great that they're using it, and I'm really glad for it. But if we had only satisfied their needs, we would have failed. And the most gratifying thing was the fact that the first thing that I saw designed with generative design was not going to fly in a spaceship. It was a manifold for distributing oil in a hydraulic pump. And I was like, wow, this is...
The CFD geek and you had to love that.
Right.
I thought it was pretty cool. It wasn't rocket exhaust. And it was a little dirtier than I had in mind, but it was awesome.
Yeah.
And the first story that came from that first user blew my mind. And actually, it took a while for it to blow my mind. We were a little opaque at first. So the first story we heard was that this engineer was working on contract to redesign part of this hydraulic pump. And he was, working on this manifold, and he was very forward-thinking, wanted to try generative design, and used it. And he came back and said, "Hey, it worked, and here's how it worked." And I said, "Well, tell me more about what happened. How did it change your thinking?" And that's where the story got really interesting. I mean, the story was that, normally he would go meet with the customer, kind of listen, whiteboard a few ideas, come back a couple weeks later with a few rough ideas, and then go through this process of refining these ideas. And the story was that, hey, with generative design, I walked in with 12 ideas I was pretty confident about, and I just put them up on the wall, and I said, which one do you want? And we went through trade-offs. And
which one do you want?
So to me, at the time I wasn't really sure. I knew it was a special story, and then I heard it over and over and over again. And so there's two things that people really like about generative design. I mean, yes, we make awesome lightweighted parts. Actually, our algorithms are as good as anything else out there on the market, but we do it in a very different way. We give people the idea to explore all these options that they wouldn't normally have time to look at. And that's really interesting. And so it's this idea of making choices and coming up with things that you wouldn't normally have thought of, which is really invigorating. Every single user of generative design, 100% that I've talked to, has told me that they found something that they would not have thought of. So there's this idea of a machine actually helping the human unlock creativity, which is huge, right? And then there's the idea of I was able to look at many more options than was humanly possible, right? So the GM story that we've talked a lot about, we have videos on it. They're a fantastic partner, a great customer. It's really inspiring to watch them and the way they use it. But their story is that they took a relatively simple subsystem, a seatbelt bracket that's critical safety factor, so safety components. So don't get me wrong, it's super important, but it's a relatively simple system. They had an assembly that had something like 8 or 9 components that were bolted together, and the normal design process is about 3 months for something like that to come up with a concept that's relatively solid and that you can take forward into simulation and validation. They had 150 valid concepts in the first day, and so that's where the idea came. Okay, we're really onto something. And then it got even better, because once I started to see companies like Claudius Peters, who was on main stage here with me just about 20 minutes ago or an hour ago, to watch a company that's 100 years old that makes gigantic cement processing plants, right? That's what they do. They make equipment for cement plants and steel plants and other mineral processing. But this is really down and dirty engineering, and it's so invigorating to see someone like that take it. And this was not something that was driven by me or my team. I heard about this at the water cooler. And I was like, hold on, you're telling me that this company, so I had a chance to meet Thomas. He's a very great Autodesk customer. He comes and speaks to some of our events, and he and I were at a conversation. He was telling me how they did this, and I was like, this is fantastic. So that was invigorating, and I've heard more and more stories like that. And so I love to see companies like Claudius Peters using a technology like this to think about a new way of doing things as they try to reinvent themselves. And Thomas said this on the stage. He said, look, we're a dinosaur. We're 100 years old. We are a dinosaur, and we will go extinct if we do not reinvent ourselves to survive. And it's great to see how they were able to use generative design. I love the story about how the engineers were super skeptical. Because they were. And they are in every case, especially if you're dealing with folks that are used to simulation and stuff. There's always a high level of skepticism, as there should be. And generally, not always, but generally the answer is people are just wowed. Right. And then they become quick converts.
So hopefully everybody knows, maybe they don't. There's one level of Fusion now, and that same Fusion is inside of the Product Design and Manufacturing collection. And could you talk to what that means for our traditional Product Design and Manufacturing collection customers who didn't have access to things like generative design? What would you say their next step should be if they wanted to get into generative design?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for mentioning that. So we were very intentional when we repackaged Fusion and came up with a single price point. We were very intentional about making sure that it was accessible to everybody who used the collection. I mean, look, our most dedicated and capable users in design and manufacturing are using the collection, and so the collection represents the move towards the future of making. Right, so you have design tools sitting against manufacturing tools and simulation tools. The whole idea is to break down the barriers within the product development process. Well, it seems kind of silly to do that, but not connect them to next generation AI tools that are trying to automate that process. And so it's there, it's in the collection. Everybody who watched the presentation today got a chance to see how Inventor and Fusion works seamlessly through any CAD. They watched how you can create kind of a basic geometry or even the connection points and port them from Inventor into Fusion, use those connection points to generate the geometry. You can do some basic editing in Fusion. You can then make a connection back to Inventor so that the geometry comes back into Inventor. You can continue to update it in Fusion and it automatically updates in Inventor. So it's a great workflow. I think if you are at all curious about generative design, which I hope most people are, you should try it. I mean, it's right there. In the talk, Steve talks about the website you can go to. If you have a collection, you get free cloud credits to figure out how to try this in Fusion. So that would be my next step.
Okay. And I think it's important to point out that Autodesk has implemented it in such a way that it really shouldn't be intimidating for people to get into. You can pretty easily work through it yourself and start getting these designs. It's amazing. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you had a chance to go to the Design and Manufacturing Awards on Monday night. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So could you tell me a little bit about some of the winners who were lucky enough to get to interview over these 3 days at AU? What did you think about what they did?
Well, first of all, they were all inspiring.
Yeah.
I mean, so full disclosure, I've been busy in the run-up to AU. I hadn't had a chance to review the winners until I actually got to see their videos that evening, and I'm just totally blown away.
Yeah.
So I had already engaged most of the winners in different ways, but I was just inspired. I think it's they're all fantastic individuals. Their projects are super inspiring in different ways.
When they asked us to sit down with them, it's like, oh sure, happy to do so, whatever. And then I would get the write-ups of what was submitted to our teams internally, as well as like pseudo success stories. And I start reading like JPL, and I'm like, this can't even be real what they're doing. The GM stuff, and even the AU Design Challenge winner, what she put together and submitted in a tiny time frame.
Yeah.
I'm like, boy, she's better at this than I am.
It was way better,
real impressive.
Way better than you are, just for the record.
Thanks, Lee.
So on a different note, your favorite part of Autodesk University so far, and then what are you looking forward to most?
Well, so for me, my favorite part of AU is always a chance to sit down and talk to people using the software. So, that by far, we have 10,000 customers here. I can sit down next to any one of them and hear their story. So, at the D&M Awards dinner, I had a chance to sit both next to Kevin Quinn from GM, who I knew pretty well, and I had a bunch of other people sitting at the table doing all sorts of things. Traditional industrial jobs. There was a mix between rocket scientists, working at JPL, and then you had people who are kind of everyday engineers at small and medium businesses, and I find their stories super inspiring. The best story I heard was not from the rocket scientist. That was pretty cool.
That was very cool.
I love the rocket scientists. I was going to make a Sheldon joke, but I didn't.
I would have approved. That's okay.
But the best story I heard was this group I was sitting with at the table. They were using Inventor scripts and Vault to automate the connection between design and manufacturing. And so they had found that the collection, contained some manufacturing tools, right? HSM and nesting. And they got really clever with scripting in Vault and Inventor, and they wrote scripts to automate the process of checking in your design to Vault. Once it's checked in, it automatically creates the G code to make that particular part. It was super cool, super inspiring. And it's stories like that that just make my mind explode.
So that is the first time I think any of our guests ever talk about Vault on the show. So, and the fact that that's your favorite story, I think that's amazing. That is your favorite story. That it includes Vault, which historically, it's an interface. It's not geometry on the screen, and the fact that that's one of your favorite stories, I think, is awesome.
Well, I'll talk about that again too. I mean, we don't talk about Vault enough. And we do as a company talk a lot about data at the center, and often people infer that that means the cloud. They think we're talking about Fusion, which is fantastic, they think, or Lifecycle or Forge, but Vault is fantastic, right? It's a step towards the future making. It puts your data at the center. You can connect it to the cloud through Lifecycle, and it's absolutely fantastic, and it's used in a huge percentage of all the sites that use both PDMC and Inventor, and to see those workflows is super inspiring.
Yeah, one of my coworkers uses he always says, if you're not using Vault, you're only using half of your software whenever you're working with Inventor. And I never thought of it that way until he said it. I was like, that is so true. If you're not using it, you're missing out on all this benefit that you get with this integrated data management. So,
one last question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to a 36 to 43-year-old, hardworking, funny, technically skilled marketing professional, what would that be?
So you said funny, so I know it's not either you guys.
What?
Wow, that was hard.
That was very funny, but harsh.
All right, so what kind of advice are you looking for?
Just general advice.
I'm crying over here now.
So my general advice, it's the same thing to everybody that works for our company. Spend time talking to customers, ask them what they do, ask them about their business. It's not that invigorating to talk to them about which features they're using and whatever tools we have, but if you ask them about their business and what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, that's the advice I give everyone. And things flow out of that.
Yeah.
That's where your ideas come from. That's where everything that we do begins.
The great thing is all of our executives that we've talked to, you've all given very similar advice, so it's nice to see you guys are all on the same page.
Not so many hurt my feelings so much.
They don't hurt our feelings the way you hurt our feelings.
So I do want you to know that I really hope this advice works, and Luke and I are also simulation geeks from days in the past, and we're both based in Pittsburgh. So if we offend anyone in these interviews, or if your advice doesn't pan out, we might come knocking for that letter of recommendation.
So I worked for Blue Ridge Numerics back in the day, and I was continually up against Fluent whenever we were trying to sell the CF Design product. So I'm sure I ran into some of your folks. This was like 10 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I knew Rita Schnipke.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I went to graduate school at UVA.
Okay.
Oh, of course.
Love UVA. I'm retiring in Charlottesville, so it's going to happen. So,
all right.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today, Greg. It's always great to have you on with us, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of AU 2018.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.